Thanks for joining me for Where I'm From, number 72. My bookmark is getting in on the action. I am reading Syllabus by Linda Berry, and I have not read Linda Berry before, which is really surprising to me because I love this. It's kind of making my brain explode a little bit because there's so much useful content in it. It's her syllabus. Hi, Andrea.
Hi. Sorry, I'm late.
You're not late. The party starts when we're here, so you're right on time.
Well, good. I wanted to hear the book rep.
Oh, I'm reading Syllabus by Linda Berry. Have you ever read Linda Berry?
Well, Austin Kleon, doesn't he talk about her all the
Yes.
time? Yeah.
As does Ross Gay, which is how I got here, because he talks about her in Inciting Joy and how he's learned so much about her, about teaching through her. So I was saying it's making my brain explode because all the pages are like,
I know.
It's so much content, but it's really thought-provoking, and I think very useful if thinking about teaching or even teaching ourselves, like the messages we send ourselves about ourselves.
Well, I saw your post with the Ross Gay of a poem, and I'm a huge Ross Gay fan too. Love Book of Delights, yes. But I just used in a class, and I'm not going to remember the exact title of the poem.
It's okay,
he wrote a poem about his potential child that could someday come. I don't know if he has kids now, but this was and he's really talking about the potentiality of this cellular happening. And I found this reading, this really great actor read the poem. Mm-hmm. And it's just so moving. He's amazing. And he's like equating the idea of having this child to the larger universe in such an expansive way. He's amazing.
He is. And I appreciate him because he does take on these topics, and he says in Inciting Joy a lot, where he doesn't as much in Book of Delights, that he is not on social media, but he still can hear the things filtered back to him, that it's like, why is this guy talking about joy and delight? Like, we have a lot of bigger problems to solve. And I appreciate, like you're talking about, his expansive thinking, and that he applies that to joy and delight and how integral they are, in fact, to survival and revolution. And you can't just always live in like, man, things suck. That's not going to get you out of bed in the morning.
And in this poem, he talks about like, how could it be possible that you might come into this world with all this heaviness? And he has some examples. But then as the poem evolves, he talks about, because if and when you do arrive, and he instills all this power in this potential being, like there's at one point he says, you'll kiss roadkill and make it come alive. Yeah. Something like that.
I think I've read that. I think
it's good.
Is it in the little, I can't think of the slim volume that was before Book of Delights. It's about happiness, I think. I can't remember the name of it.
I found it, Maria Popova did this incredible poetry reading series where she had actors come and read these like seminal works. And I just once I found one, it was sort of like TikTok for me. I was watching all these poetry, all these actors get up and read these great poems. So I'll
look it up.
Yeah, I'll send you the link.
Yes, please do, because it sounds really wonderful.
Yeah, sorry for the tangent. Whoops.
Tangents are good. That's why we're here. And sometimes it's good to have a tangent before you read your poem, because you get warmed up and used to this.
I don't want to be compared to Ross Gay, that's for sure.
None of us want to be compared to Ross Gay. He makes it look so easy. He's like a ballerina, He makes it seem like there's no effort, that he's literally just stream of consciousness, even though it's so clearly not. He does make it feel like you're there with him while he's talking, which is one of the things that I admire about him so much. It feels inclusive, like he's putting his arms around you and drawing you in.
Yeah. I'd love to see him in person.
Yeah. I'd like to go to the orchard. He talks about it a lot in Inciting Joy. Like, I want to go there and pick some fruit off the trees and listen to poetry. It sounds wonderful. I don't really want to go to Bloomington though. So, but if he sends me a ticket, I'll go. So would you like to read your poem? I would love to
For
hear
sure,
it.
for sure. Thank you. Thank you for the invitation to join you and other writers. I am from stacks of newspapers, duct tape, rubber bands, and balls of string. From Bengay and Bear Baby Aspirin. I'm from the brown paneled rec room with a rabbit ear TV, dark and damp. It smelled like the dirt outside. I'm from the yellow forsythia bush at the end of the drive, the one my father ran over with his VW bug each icy winter. I'm from the cherry tree out front and the plum tree in back, and the wormy fruit we never picked but left rotting on the ground. I'm from deep pink azaleas, green crabgrass, dandelions, and lightning bugs. I'm from homemade fudge and card games. I'm from Tink and Dodie, the artist and the jock, the one who sweat heavy and the one who tanned deep. From finish your plate, people are starving in Africa, and don't believe everything people tell you. I'm from No Meat Fridays, Sunday morning mass, and a prayer before dinner. Bless us, O Lord, in these thy gifts which we are about to receive from thy bounty through Christ our Lord. Amen. I'm from Baby Boom, Broomall, and the French Canadian Audettes. I'm from hot dogs and baked beans, meatloaf and ketchup, tarts and jello, store-brand cola, and Lipton's lemon powdered iced tea, instant mashed potatoes from a pot, and frozen broccoli boiled in a pot. I'm from my father's silly sayings, my hair hurt, my teeth itch, and my mom's motto, save 10% of everything you earn. The black and white Polaroid photos from my childhood were tossed in a cardboard box and stored in the rec room cubbyhole. I'm from this disorganized collection, a handful of dead relatives and fading memories that now live on tape to the pages of a small album and stored in my cabinet, waiting to be remembered. I'm from those moments long ago, and I hold on.
That was beautiful.
Thanks.
And I loved it. And I loved all the mentions of nature, which of course you're prompted to do, but I felt like they were very evocative. And so where did you grow up? In the Midwest?
I grew up outside of Philly.
Okay.
Outside of Philadelphia. But I lived in Chicago for like 20 years, and now I'm in California, so I made my way west.
Somewhere cold with lightning bugs.
I think
Thank you, Rebecca.
I think it's also lightning bugs. What else do they call it? Fireflies.
Yes,
like,
fireflies.
I think that's a regional thing as to what you refer to them as.
They
were never fireflies for us. They were lightning bugs.
I love that. We don't have them. And is my dog really loud for you, or is it just loud for me?
We can hear him or her.
Sorry, it's her. Josie. Maybe she'll come join us. Josie. I love the wood paneling. That really took me back. So much wood paneling back then.
I know.
Everything. And I've been thinking about it recently, actually, because we had wood paneling, like avocado green wood paneling.
We had some green too. This was brown down there. And it was like I lived in a split level. So half of the house, and we lived on a hill. So half, like the rec room was half underground, and the one window was like wedged up at the top.
Yes. I lived in a basement room like that.
Yeah,
not in my childhood home, but in another home.
Yeah, so dark.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I had a friend who had like a rec room like that, and I thought it was very cool, Andrea, just so you know. I was like, wow, this is like a dedicated space just for young people. You know,
but didn't
but it's someone else's.
Our
no.
was flooded.
Okay,
and
so that's why it smelled like earth.
Yeah, yeah. And I think everybody's flooded because that's how the houses were built. So, you know, with the split level, there's an upstairs, a middle floor, and the downstairs, but there were only 6 steps between each. So they weren't like full stairs. So the middle floor sort of was like this floating mezzanine. I guess it was like, well, in the neighborhood I grew up in, I guess it was built in the 50s when baby boom, 20,000 of the same house.
Wow.
Like everybody I knew lived in the same house. I mean, there were little things like you might have brick outside versus some stone, but the configuration, I mean, my best friend growing up, these were tiny 3-bedroom houses. And she was in a family of 7. The 4 boys were in one room, the 3 girls in the other. Yeah.
Yeah. Did you ever get lost? My husband has a story like that where he got lost in a neighborhood like that
Oh, because
because it was so similar and he was new
I,
to it. It
yeah,
was like, you wouldn't though because it was your neighborhood. So you would have it ingrained in you.
yeah, yeah. And now actually when the house was sold quite a while ago, but if I go back to that neighborhood, now the trees and
Yes,
things
it's
do
all
look
grown up.
different. Yeah. But yeah, cookie cutter houses. Yeah.
Yes. And children starving in Africa. That's also really like one that was on TV. Like it was one of those ones that was so regular that it would show up, I think, in family sitcoms to reference my conversation with Natalie last week. Like I feel like that was one that showed up like in the Wonder Years. People
I
would
mean, you'd see ads to
you'd see
donate.
somebody no, you'd see a parent saying, hey, eat it, there's
Yeah.
children starving in Africa.
Well,
Like it was such a thing that people said.
yeah. And the thing was it really didn't.
Mean
How
anything?
is it going to help them if I eat more?
Like if you deconstruct it, it's like, are we going to mail this to them? Like, I don't
Exactly.
understand how this is. Yeah.
Well,
And it's,
my older brother, my brother's 9 years older than I am, so even he was only at the dinner table till I was about 7 or 8. But he would just be like, "Okay, get me an envelope," just being a wiseacre teenager, and kind of pointing out to my father how ridiculous that was. And then my mother saying at other times, warning me as I ventured out into the world, like, don't believe everything people tell you.
yeah. Was there context given with that? Or was it just a general rule of
Just
thumb?
constant, I think, a general fear
Mm-hmm.
that she had of her daughter venturing out in the world. Not not that she didn't trust me, but that maybe she didn't have as much faith as she wanted to have in my ability to make good decisions.
She was worried you'd be taken in by someone. Like you would be fooled.
But possibly, or I just, yeah, don't believe everything people tell you. That they
Mm-hmm.
don't trust what's out there. You should always be on your guard, kind of thing.
I think it's interesting for me that many of the sayings that show up in these poems, they are not given context. Like, because there are truths in these that are useful. But like if they're just things that people say, but there's no conversation around it, it's really not helpful. That's something I've noticed as I've grown older and people talk about these things they're told. Like that doesn't really help you. Like, how do you know what to believe and not to believe if you're not having a conversation about, do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah,
Like with your mom, like if she's not saying, okay, for example, here are the things you should not believe, that every guy who wants to have sex with you loves you. Like, for example,
yeah,
because I
yeah,
think that's one that was
yeah.
being
Definitely,
implied, right?
definitely.
Yeah,
Well, I grew up Roman Catholic.
right,
There was
right,
always that,
right.
premarital sex was everybody was terrified of that.
Even though it was
But
happening, rampantly happening, and everyone
okay,
sort of knew it.
I think that's why they were so terrified. Uh, but the flip side of that is that, like in the recovery environment, I'm not in the recovery environment, but I value a lot of the foundations that are
I am in the
there.
recovery environment. So, and they do use slogans.
Yeah, so like
Mm-hmm.
one day at a time,
Yeah.
without any context, still there's so much meaning in one day at a time, and it can apply in so many circumstances. So sometimes, because you kind of, when you're writing yourself, or if you're teaching
Mm-hmm.
writing, you're like, don't use cliches, don't use these overused phrases. But in fact, sometimes they're incredibly important or meaningful. Like one day at a time is something I just helps me a lot.
It's so useful. Sometimes it's 1 hour at a time, which is
Yeah,
something we talk about in meetings. It can be 1 minute at a time. And I think it's also useful for life, like one action. I mean, they say, the next indicated step, but, one action at a time, because so often we're thinking so far
yeah.
ahead, what we're going to be doing, and none of that's going to happen. So just do the next. It's been a series of distractions. My dog is quietly sleeping here on the floor now, though, so this is progress. What was your experience like writing this poem? And I want to say thank you for interviewing me for brevity. That was such a wonderful conversation. I really appreciated how the questions you asked, the conversation we had around the poems, it led me to deeper reflection on what I am learning from this process and why I'm doing it. So I really appreciated you doing that.
Oh,
Thank you.
well, thank you. And thank you for being part of it. And I could see that happening
Mm-hmm.
when we were in conversation. You're very good on the spot,
No, thanks.
and you kind of went to those deeper meanings quickly. But I think it was percolating, and then like, oh, this is coming out. So I have a journalism background, and I
Yes.
think part of the reason, well, a few things. So when I started the poem, I'm from stacks of newspapers, duct tape, rubber bands, and balls of string. My father owned the local newspaper when I was growing up. And it was a print paper, came out once a week. Literally, the way it was delivered were we always, other than the Volkswagen, my father used to buy used police cars at auctions because
Yes.
they
They're
were, really
very
strong.
affordable too, right?
Mostly I think because they were so
Mm.
powerful,
Okay.
and they had really big trunks. And
Mm.
the way in the early days when I was like a little kid, the way the paper was delivered is he would stick like two teenagers in the trunk
Yeah.
with big stacks of newspapers, and they would because it was I think it was subscription,
Mm.
but they would fling it into the driveways as someone drove the cop car. And then the joke when I was a teenager, usually the car would get painted before he bought it, but when I
Mm-hmm.
was a teenager he kept a blue and white one, and the cop cars out where I lived were blue and white, and he kept the light on the side. So like it came to pick you up before I learned to drive, he'd pull up in this blue and white car and he'd start flashing the light. It was, yeah, it totally embarrassing.
I'm
um
sure that it was very embarrassing. And when you sent me the pictures, you said that you grew up in a newspaper family, but there weren't that many pictures.
Yeah, well, so my father always carried, excuse me, his Polaroid camera, and it was awful going anywhere with my father because everyone knew him,
Mm-hmm.
and everybody's like, "Take my picture for the paper." And
Mm-hmm.
that photo that you used, I'm pretty sure we were at the camera shop because we were always going to the camera shop to buy more film. Um, but there was just this irony that there were no pictures of the family, or very few, because he was always taking pictures for the paper. And back then, it was a Polaroid. It would come out, he'd rub it with his
Yeah.
hands, rip it off, look at it like, okay, is that good enough? And that was the quality for the paper. But you were asking about my process with writing the poem.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I actually, so I was aware of this Mad Libs kind of poem.
Mm-hmm.
And I saw what you were doing, and I was listening to them, and I used it in a class.
Mm-hmm.
I teach grade writing, and um, it was so generative. Like I showed it to the folks. There's the example that comes with
Mm-hmm.
it, and they had the week, and they came back with it, and everyone was so really enjoyed using it. They found it so generative. They were loving each other's poems. So I kind of, sometimes if you teach and you like put a prompt out, everybody's free writing and you're busy like kind of getting ready
Yeah.
for the next thing.
Yeah.
And I've been trying to turn that around, like, okay, if they're going to free write, I should free write.
Mm-hmm.
So that was this thing with the poem. I'm like, well, they did, I should do the poem. So I just like one Sunday, sat and had like a cup of tea and just totally enjoyed it. So thank you.
Well, I'm glad you enjoyed it. I think it's enjoyable, and I have written more since my initial one, and it's fun to revisit and explore different points of view on our life lives, because I that's something that sort of consumes me as I'm writing this memoir, all the different points of view we can have on our own existence, and also how many different lives we have within our life.
It would be interesting to see if, and I don't know how much restructuring it would, because that one, it kind of takes you back
Yes.
to, you don't have to go all the way to childhood, but is if it could be just refocused and where you're pulling things from the present or for a more contemporary time.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure that.
I did one about COVID.
Oh, you did?
So yeah, for like a COVID poetry reading, I was like, well, this would be a fun form to use. And I also was interested in just writing something about COVID because I knew that it was going to like disappear. This thing
Okay.
that felt so consuming, like we were all living in it. It was my life every day. I knew that it was going to like ebb away quickly.
Yeah.
And it has, even though we're still in the midst of it in many ways, but that sort of like lockdown
Yeah. Yeah.
feeling.
And at a certain point, like, unfortunately, well, big events do come back in writing. And I just had read a piece by a friend, and she recently had COVID. and but at a certain point, it's been written about
Mhm.
so much in so many ways that people move on from it from a writing standpoint. But
Yeah, it was
cool
more
that you,
for myself, you know, like, and I think that's how the poem can function. Like, we can just do this for ourselves if we want.
yeah,
Um,
I think, well, I think that's always, I mean, I do write to publish, but I think it's always really important when you're first writing a piece, like you just have to push that away. You're writing a memoir, it's all the stuff about getting it published has to be here so that you can really get the right words on the page. You got to kind of blank that out of your mind, I think, to give yourself the freedom to really
I agree.
put what you need on the page. Yeah.
I have, because it's the only way I can write it. Also, it's like I can't get involved with like changing names or making composites or like that's
Yeah.
later. You know, like right now it's just, I don't know. It's such an for me, it's so far it's been such an interesting experience because I remember so much more than I thought I would, and I think that this prompt has actually really helped me
Oh,
because
good.
it's helped me dig into sensory details and like just sort of sit myself somewhere and look around like as that person that I was when I was 4 or 5 or 7. And doing this has been such a gift for me because I love talking to everyone and hearing their poems and just creating a space where um I don't it's just so positive. It's positive for me and I love it.
Oh,
So thank
I
you
think
for being a
it's,
part of it.
oh, thank you. And that, I think that's why I enjoy interviewing so much. I mean, one,
Yeah.
I'm curious,
Mm-hmm.
but two, it's like so fun.
Yeah.
Um, and people are really like yourself. People usually are really happy to open up and share. And it's, you know, it's better than journalism doing these like Q&As for Brevity Blog because it's not, you know, journalism can get a little squirrely. Like you might be trying to interview someone who doesn't want to be interviewed.
Mm-hmm.
It's, you know, with writers, they're happy to share their craft and what's going on. It's cool.
Yes, and you aren't just going to sit and have that conversation with yourself. You know, like it's nice to have someone
Yes.
ask you questions and to consider them like, oh, this is what I'm doing. This is what I'm working towards. When I mean, lots of times with my life, I'm just one day at a time. I'm just doing the next
Yeah.
thing. And I'm not really like pulling back for the long view. I'm just kind of in the moment. And it is nice from time to time to pause and consider what's happening.
Oh, totally.
So,
It's because it's a fairly solitary act. You might be in a workshop,
yeah.
but I think, you know, like my husband will go, you know, he's in the insurance industry and he'll go away to industry meetings and you would like, why would I be jealous of that? I'm kind of jealous of the collegial environment he's in. And that's why, you know, these opportunities, I think Zoom, not that the pandemic had a silver lining per se, but I mean, the ability, like we met
Yeah.
literally in the online
Yeah.
world, the ability to have, I think it's been a real boon for writers because
I do
we've
too.
had so much more ability to connect with each other in like in inspiring ways. Like, because we can talk about our craft, we can talk about a bad day writing, we can talk about
Yes.
nothing.
And the co-writing too, which you do, and I do sometimes with Alison K. Williams. So it's just even that is very effective in a way that is surprising. I think like this idea of all getting together on a Zoom and just writing, you know, you're like, how does that work? You're not even looking at each other.
I
You're just,
know.
but there is like this. You can feel this, like we're all kind of holding each other up.
I totally. And like all it is like a hello in the beginning and a brief
Yeah,
check-in at the end. But you feel like after a couple of weeks, you know these people.
yeah,
Yeah. And they do what,
yeah, and you're rooting for
yeah.
them. Yeah.
Yeah.
So it helps with the solitariness. That doesn't feel right, but I don't know what else the word is. So.
No, I actually probably like 4 or 5 years ago or a little bit longer, I was saying to my husband, like it, and this was before the pandemic, and I was really feeling bogged down by like the lack of connectivity. And here I teach, I run a school. I mean, there
Yeah,
are people to connect with, but
yeah,
I just was feeling isolated and the work was just leaving me. I
mm-hmm.
just felt too alone.
Yeah,
And I couldn't figure out how to change it. And And then it just did. I don't, I can't even, I think I open my mind more? Is it Zoom? I think you do have to put yourself out there to meet
You
other
do.
writers.
You do.
You do. Like,
And it's
this is so
uncomfortable.
great.
You know,
It,
like it's a little uncomfortable. It's a conversation I was just having with a writer friend before this. Like, I think many of us deal with, we want to share our words, we want to be seen, but then we also sort of want to be invisible. That's kind of the push and pull of it. And she said that at one point, someone said to her, but you're never invisible. It's just you fooling yourself. And I was like,
oh, that's
oh,
good.
that's something to think about.
One of the things I struggle with now, it's years gone by, but when I went to moving to writing full time and I was working as a journalist, was calling myself a writer. Like, if someone said, "What do you do?" I go, "Oh, well, I write, I do magazine articles." I wouldn't just say the word, "I'm a writer." Um, and
Yeah.
finally owning that moniker, and I really encourage anybody, if you're going to a co-write, if you're keeping a journal, uh, you're a writer, you're writing.
I agree. I agree. And I struggled with it as well. And then I had to have a conversation with myself, like, what byline do you need to get? Or what is the thing exactly that makes you feel real? It's it's ridiculous.
Well,
I'm
what do you
writing
think?
every day. I'm a writer,
Yeah, I
you know?
think the one distinction is it's not getting published and bylines, it's sharing your work. So I take that back. Like,
Yeah.
if you're journaling, you're writing,
Yeah.
but the crossover, the bridge to being a writer is that you share your work.
Mm.
And that's the scary part.
It
you know?
is, for sure. Yeah, that's a good distinction, Andrea. Any other last thoughts before we wrap up?
Um, I guess the one other thought is about being a writer and sharing your work is it's a reciprocal process. And so I'm like so thankful to you and other folks where I know if I said, "Allison, I've got this flash piece, would you take a look?" You would.
Yeah.
And you'd give me honest feedback. So if you want to get that, you got to give that. So
it's true. It's so important to have people that you can trust with your writing, and then you can be trusted with theirs. I
yeah.
think that's a big part of, and I was in a conversation earlier today about, I think we all learned that the hard way, unfortunately. You give
Well,
your writing to the wrong person.
no, you're right. You really have to make an assessment. Like, can you
Yeah.
is this safe? Do you
Yep.
feel like this is safe? So, I think you watch for a while, but also I think being open to giving it, maybe that's the way to start. Like, you
It
encounter.
definitely was for me. Like saying to people, I'm willing to read your stuff if you want to trade. And I was usually the person to read for
Yeah,
first. And you get a good sense of reading and giving feedback, how they'll be when they read your stuff and give feedback.
exactly. And it's just great practice
It
too
is.
for doing that kind of work. But yeah, then I totally agree.
Yeah.
I totally agree.
Well, those are great thoughts. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for this. I'm sorry, a little difficult getting on, but
Well, I'm sorry my dog barked, but now she is passed out here. Like, oh, she just closed the door. Okay, she was passed out. But that's part of what makes it special. And I'm grateful you were able to join me. And again, thank you for interviewing me for brevity. And I look forward to talking to you soon again.
Great. Have a great day.
Bye.
Bye.